So I want to just introduce quickly our guest today. Scott Stabile is an author of 2 books, Just Love and Big Love. And he did a workshop yesterday here, and several of us attended that workshop, and I think we were all filled with love and really appreciated that experience. I know I did. Scott is a love activist, and I think you will be able to experience that as he shares with us his thoughts about love and how we can change the world through love. So I'm so pleased and honored to have Scott with us today. So Scott, thank you for being here. So come on up and...
Cool, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. That was so beautiful, that song. Wow. And thank you, David, for having me here. And it's a real honor. You know, I'm a big fan of, I'm not a particularly religious person, to be honest and upfront with you all. And yet I'm a big fan of Unity churches. I love the energy, I love the openness, I love the acceptance that happens in these congregations. I love the commitment to social activism. I love that you all compost. like these things really excite me because I feel like you are showing up in service to what is being talked about and experienced here. So I really honor that, and so for me, it's a real thrill to be here. I'm going to talk about love. It's what I talk about all the time and my favorite thing to talk about. And I'm going to talk specifically about self-love. But before I do that, I'd like us all to just take a moment to really root yourself in presence and maybe take a breath and reflect on the fact that by showing up here today, you are not just showing up for your church and your community, you are showing up for yourselves, because some part of you recognizes that by attending these services and being a part of this community, that you are adding more peace, more joy, more meaning to your own life. And that is a beautiful thing. That is the essence of self-love, to consider those choices, and then also to acknowledge when we're operating in alignment with loving ourselves, right? So I'm just going to ask us all to just take a breath in. Honor this commitment you're making to yourself today, and breathe out. Cool. And now I'm going to tell you a story, a couple short stories. One is about green tea, and one is about my underwear. So I apologize ahead of time in this sacred place, but it's relevant, I promise. So I used to drink a lot of green tea in my day. I still drink a good amount of green tea, but I used to drink it every day. And green tea, many of you probably know, is a very fickle tea. It can't be steeped for too long, or it tastes really, really bitter. So for me, I like to steep my green tea at about 1 minute, 45 seconds. That's my perfect steeping time. Anything after 3 minutes is nasty. 5 or 6 minutes, it's basically like cat urine. I mean, in my estimation of what that might taste like. So for years I would drink the tea, or I would make my cup of tea, and I'd leave the room, and I'd come running back into the kitchen because I knew that several minutes had passed and I was going to drink another nasty cup of green tea. So day after day, probably 80% of the time, I'm racing into the kitchen, and maybe 4 minutes passed, or 5 or 8. I don't even want to tell you what 8 minutes of green tea tastes like. But each day, I would still drink the tea. Maybe out of laziness, not wanting to waste a tea bag, I don't know. I would still drink nasty cup of green tea after nasty cup of green tea. Until one day, the alarm went off, and it was like, set an alarm, time your tea. This is a very easy thing to do. This takes literally about 8 seconds of my life. My phone was always just sitting there anyway. I was probably on my phone at some point. So I started to time my tea. I'd set my timer for 1 minute, 45 seconds, and I'd do whatever I was doing, and then the ducks would quack, and I knew my tea was ready. And I would come into the kitchen, pull out the tea bag, and have a perfect cup of green tea. And day after day, the ducks would quack, and I'd have a perfect cup of green tea until this pattern of self-care was built into the ritual of making my tea. So hold on to that story for a second, and now I'd like to talk to you about my underwear. So before I talk to you about my underwear, and before you judge me for what I'm about to say, I'd like, by a show of hands, how many of you have ever worn uncomfortable underwear in your life? And you're in church, so you have to be honest. Okay, so that's basically about 90 to 95% of you. So I was living in Panama a few years ago, sitting at the kitchen table. I'm on my computer and I'm shifting and I'm on my computer and I'm like pulling it out and it's writing and it's uncomfortable and I'm spending 2 hours trying to write and then thinking, these underwear are awful. I hate these underwear. They're so uncomfortable. Why do they make underwear like this? Going through this whole thing back and forth. And finally, again, the alarm went off. And this alarm told me, take them off your body. like get them off your body. There is a fix for this, for what you're going through right now. And that's what I did. And because I tend toward melodrama, and because I was really angry at this point, at these underwear, I took them off, I grabbed some scissors, I cut them into pieces, and I threw them in the trash. And then I went right to my underwear drawer, and I promise you, a decent percentage of you are going to go home and do exactly what I'm talking about right now. I went right to my underwear drawer, pulled it out, grabbed that pair that I know I don't like, that pair that rides, that pair that cramps, took them all out, threw them in the trash. And the reason I'm telling you stories about green tea and underwear, which seems absurd and silly, is because my habit around green tea was a habit of not taking care of myself. And it was the same with my underwear. So every time I chose to drink a cup of bitter green tea was a choice in self-abuse. Every minute I spent in uncomfortable underwear was a minute of self-abuse. And I do not say that as hyperbole. Because what I'm saying to myself, what I'm saying to God, what I'm saying to life in general by making those choices is that I do not matter enough to myself to take care of myself in the most basic way, right? And the deeper message, of course, is I do not love myself enough to look after myself in this most basic way. And that feels kind of heavy and dire, but that's not the end of the story, because when we look at that and when we realize that and acknowledge it, and also acknowledge that I want to be moving through my life as a person who is loving myself deeply and wholly, I can start to make different choices, which is what I did when I started timing the tea, which is what I did when I took off the underwear. So at any point in self-care, in self-love, it's about paying attention to our choices, the choices that we're making in our lives. Because I can assure you, if you're making choices around your green tea and underwear and these really seemingly insignificant aspects of our lives that don't reflect self-love, you're doing it in the bigger areas of your life too. And that's why green tea is important. And that's why underwear is important, because it's the starting point. It's the day-to-day things we do, the day-to-day choices we make that either do reflect love of self or do not reflect love of self. And once we are aware, once we start paying attention, we can change our lives overnight simply by considering the choices we're making and tuning into how we feel. Does this choice add more peace, more joy, more meaning into my life? If so, beautiful. Continue to make those choices. Does this joy deplete me? Does it take away from joy and meaning? If so, beautiful. Start making fewer of those choices. If we did nothing else but pay attention to the choices we're making and make more that align with self-love, we would change our lives, right? And the beautiful thing about this, and where my hope lives large, is that we can start this at any time. It doesn't matter if you spent 3 decades treating yourself like garbage and not making good choices. Here we are now. This is a unity church. We understand the power of energy. We understand the power of intention. We understand that at any point we can choose to live our life differently, right? It's what matters from this moment on is what matters most. The choices you make from this moment on matter the most. Those are the ones that are going to affect your life most profoundly. So it's not just about our choices, though. It's also about our thoughts and our words, the words that we speak to ourselves. We know that everything is energy. our actions, our words, and thoughts. So it's incumbent upon us, if we want to be people who are operating from self-love. And I think it's important to say here, because what happens for some of us is we get caught up with the notion of self-love as a selfish act. And we all want to be really nice, good people, and we don't want to be judged or condemned for being selfish. So it keeps us sometimes from considering ourselves first. But when you reflect on self-love, what you come to understand is that every time you are taking care of yourself, every time you are loving yourself, you always have more to offer other people. As the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So it's important to take care of ourselves. Self-love is the most beautiful kind of selfishness there is. It's selfish in that we're considering ourselves, but it's profoundly generous in that we know by considering ourselves, we can show up for others in a more holistic way, in a more loving way. When you're getting a good night's sleep, when you feel well fed with nourishing food, you're going to be much nicer to the people in your life. And if I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm a monster. I know this about myself, right? So it's incumbent upon me to sleep well, to take care of myself in that way. So let's think of our thoughts for a second. We're not controlling all of our thoughts. Our thoughts are happening like this. Sometimes 1,000 thoughts have happened before we've even brought our awareness to what's going on in our mind. And sometimes for many of us, because we have human minds with egos that are wired for self-abuse, what happens for many of us is that we're operating in this place of self-abuse for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes a week, beating ourselves up, telling ourselves that who we are is ugly and stupid and unworthy and not enough. And the thing we can do the moment we have awareness that that's what we're doing, that that's what we're offering to ourselves, we can make a conscious, intentional point to offer ourselves something different. To offer ourselves something that is rooted in love, that is rooted in the truth of who we are. Because the truth of who we are, each one of us in this room, each one of us on this planet, is that we are worthy as we are. Not because of anything we've done, not because of our beautiful family, not because of our 10 degrees, not because of our incredible job, but because we are all children of God. And as such, we are all inherently worthy. And when you start to understand that and really own that truth, when you start to move through the world with the understanding of your worth as a human being, you start to move through the world like this, expansive and powerful. And because everything is energy, you start to naturally invite possibilities, relationships, connections into your life that reflect this expansiveness that is rooted in your worth as a human being, as a divine child of God and of nature. And it's powerful, it's life-changing. And we all have the capacity to do this, to live our lives in this way. So how does that look? It looks like when you get up in the morning and you walk into the bathroom and you start criticizing all these things about your body or your hair or your face, because that's where our minds go naturally. It looks like offering ourselves something different the moment we're aware that that's what we're doing. Connecting to that place that David took us to in that prayer, that love, that deep well ocean of love that lives within each of us, and listening to that voice and what that voice is telling you about yourself. And I assure you, the voice of love never tells you that you are ugly and not enough and to this and not enough this. The voice of love is here to remind you that you are beautiful and worthy and enough exactly as you are. What's helped me is getting in the habit of not believing my mind often and ever when it's trying to communicate information to me that suggests I'm anything less than worthy. We're conditioned in this world to believe our thoughts, and yet our thoughts are telling us so much of the time that we're ugly and stupid and worthless. Why would we ever believe this? Love does not live in the mind, and truth lives in love, which means if I'm going to believe anything, I'm going to believe the truth of love and the messages of love and the messages of my heart, right? This, for me, is just common sense, and it's also not always that easy. Everything I'm saying up here is very simple. You know, love yourself. It's very simple. When you're beating yourself up, offer yourself words of love. It's very simple. It's not always easy, but it's always within our power to do so if we are intentional about it, if we're paying attention, if we come to realize and accept really that we are responsible for the lives that we're living. I am responsible for the life that I'm living. I take ownership of it because I know that by taking ownership of my choices, I empower myself to create change. Not by going to battle with my mind, but by accepting that my mind, in part, is wired with lies. So challenging my mind, loving it, recognizing it's just doing what all minds do. We're all human. We're all dealing with the same stuff. But not believing it. Going here, right? One other thing I want to talk about in the context of loving ourselves, one of my favorite quotes is from the Buddha. He said, if you truly loved yourself, you could never hurt another. And I titled this talk, To Love Yourself is to Love Our World, because that's really what I believe is the essence of love, is that when we are so centered in love of self, all we have to offer in return is love of other people. That's why it's so beautiful. That's why it's so generous. And I find, like many of you, I suspect, that there are moments where I feel paralyzed by the darkness of this world. I get lost in hopelessness because there's so much violence, there's so much disconnection, there's so much insanity. And I feel like there's nothing that I can do personally to change it, right? And that may be true in some contexts. There's nothing I can do personally to keep us from going to war with North Korea or Iran. I understand that and accept that. But I remember then the power of love and how powerful love is and what love invites into our lives. Things like kindness and compassion and empathy and forgiveness. And that is where our power lives. So when I'm feeling hopeless, like I can't change anything about this world, I remember that the power of kindness to change one heart is immeasurable. I think of the moments in my life when I've been down and I've been touched by the kindness of a stranger or the empathy of a loved one, and it's changed my entire day. We all know this. We all know that we are powerful beyond measure when we are connecting with the energy of love and living our lives from that space. So I encourage you, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling paralyzed by what's going on in the world, like there's nothing you can do, get out into your community and be of service. Call a friend and see what you can do for them. Remember the power of kindness that lives within you and how when you are operating from that place, there is no possibility that you will not touch someone in a positive and transformational way. This is the gift of love, and it's huge, and it's immeasurable, and it's everywhere, all the time, within and outside of us. And we know this. We know this. And this is where our power lives. We can all be examples of what it looks like. I love that I don't remember what it was called, but the service that you're going to be doing for people experiencing homelessness in your community. This is the way to show love. This is the way to be active. A friend called me a love activist, and I've taken that title because that's what I feel I am. I make a lot of noise for love because I believe in it. And I think we need more of us out there in the world who are activists, but not forgetting what love invites us to do and how it invites us to show up. Stand strong for what you believe in, but we don't have to do it ever in a way that dehumanizes others. Even others who may seek to dehumanize us, even then we can show up with empathy and compassion, but make clear what we stand for. This is the example we can lead with in the world, and we can change the conversation, politically and otherwise. So what I'd like to do, just in closing, is just to invite you all, if you want to close your eyes and put your hands, if you're able, on your heart. And what I'd like you to do is just really, really tune in again to that ocean of love that lives within you, that is you. And from that place, I want you to repeat the words that I say. I'll speak them first, and then please speak them out loud. And you're going to be speaking them from yourself to yourself, from the ocean of love that lives within you. I love you. I love you so much. You are unbelievably beautiful. You are 100% enough. And you are so very worthy, exactly as you are. I love you. I love you so much.